From his 3-hour bus rides to moving in with his co-host on the very first day, Miguel has had a super interesting radio journey. He's the host of Miguel and Holly out at Hot 101.5 in Tampa Bay, and I had to get him on this show because he's just an interesting guy, and I didn't realize how interesting he was until I had him on the show. He's just had this amazing radio journey, and he also sadly deals with tragedy really well, and he has some great advice for anyone that wants to learn how to do it as a radio person. You know, you wake up the next day, what are you supposed to do when you have all these things that are happening? Well, check out this video. There are some amazing tips. He walks you through his process and his show's process on how to deal with tragedies. But in this video, we're just going to get to know Miguel behind the Miguel and Holly show on how to radio. What's the first song you ever talked into?
Ooh, that's a good one. I want to say it was probably a Kelly Clarkson song because it was around that time when Breakaway, Behind His Hazel Eyes were really big, and I was on a top 40 that was really rock-based back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so we played the Henders and the Finger 11s, all Paramore, all those bands back on top 40 back in the day.
I remember those years of top 40. That was good. What's the one that came to mind? Hoobastank comes to my mind when I think of that era. So no, Kelly Clarkson probably. Yeah, we had play those all the time. So where did you start out in radio? Well, how did you get the bug for radio, first of all?
When I was in middle school, I always loved the people on the radio. Even when I was in elementary school, before I could even know really what any of the jokes meant, I would always just laugh along with people, and I'd lock myself in my room and record the Miguel show on my tape recorder back then. And then it was when I got to middle school, we had a middle school radio station. It was like a 1-mile radius around the campus where you just went in and you read the lunch menu, when the clubs were going to be, and you would have thought that I was hosting a morning show in Market One. Like, I was prepared to go every time we recorded once a week. And so then from there, it just sort of expanded where I did my high school. We had a radio station. Then I studied it in college. And I finally got my true big break in Savannah, Georgia, when it was Clear Channel at the time at WAEV, KISS FM. That's where I really started. So I interned there, worked part-time throughout my senior year of college at Georgia Southern University. And then when I graduated, or 2 months before graduation, the rare chance that I was offered a full-time job right before I graduated. I mean, it was kismet. It was really crazy how they were like, oh, you got 2 months left of college. We got a full-time job opening for you. And so I started as operations assistant, sort of swing assistant to the PD of the Top 40 KISS FM. And I produced the conservative news talk morning show for 6 months.
Wow.
That was fun.
Did you have to finish college, or did they just pull you out Kobe style?
Oh, no. That was, after everything I went through to get to college, I don't care if they were going to offer me Elvis Duran's job. I was going to get that bachelor's degree. I don't care who offered me a job. But yeah, I was able to finish, and literally I graduated college on a Friday, moved to Savannah that weekend, and that Monday I started full time and haven't looked back.
Wow. Where did you grow up? Where did you move to Savannah from?
I grew up in Atlanta.
Okay.
And so I was bussed up from sort of the south part of Atlanta near the airport, in a not so great area of town. And I was bussed up to the northern part of Atlanta. So I was on the school bus for 3 hours every single morning.
Ugh.
And because our place where we lived was right near the bus depot. So I would get on the bus around 5:20, 5:30 every morning. And that's really where my love of morning shows just expanded, because from middle school through high school, I did this from 7th grade to I graduated from high school. I fell in love with morning shows, and I would listen. I would be there for most of the entire show. And so that's when I really learned that that's what I wanted to do, being on the school bus for 3 hours every morning.
And then after school, you had to obviously go home. So 3 hours back. So what time did you get home at night?
It was actually surprisingly the ride back was only 2 hours.
Oh, okay.
So I just 2 hours.
It was a couple hours, yeah.
So I would get home around like 5:30. If
Jeez.
I had to stay late for a club, then I'd get home around like 6:30.
Do you remember the morning show you listened to on the way to school?
Absolutely, because I used to bug all those people so much. Now, thankfully, they're friends of mine and they're like colleagues and mentors. But in middle school in Atlanta, it was Steve and Vicky on Star 94. That sort of was like the mom station everyone listened to. And then like towards the middle of middle school, end of middle school, everyone turned to 99X, Barnes, Leslie, and Jimmy, and they were a legendary alternative station in Atlanta back in the day. And then it was a fateful spring morning in 2001. I listened the very first day they were on the air, The Burt Show, with Burt Weiss, Jeff Dollar, Melissa Carter, Jen Hobby. I was there the very first morning that they started. And because they were a new station, it was Q100 hot hits, and I remember the reason why I was listening the first day is because they had someone from the Real World, Lindsay from Real World Seattle, and I was like a huge reality show geek back then, and I was like, Lindsay from the Real World Seattle is going to be on the radio in Atlanta. Oh my gosh. And so I tuned in and I listened all throughout high school, and I have been on this show several times. None of them remember because I was that annoying kid that now comes on my show and will be like, hey, can I talk about this? Da, da, da. That was me back then. They were so fantastic, and they all, as I got through college, and then later on after college, helped when I ever had any advice or when I needed any advice. They would always lend an ear, listen to audio for me. They were all just so nice, and even now to this day.
Okay, so you got that first gig in Savannah. How did you get from there to the next step?
So then from there, I was there for a year, and I was miserable because I thought, I got a full-time job in radio. I'm going to be on a morning show. Well, it was a conservative morning show. I'm gay and I'm black, painting with a very broad stroke. I'm not very conservative.
Yeah.
And I'm a little outspoken. And my sole job was to produce the show and to do traffic reports. And so as the morning show host, who I still respect, Bill Edwards on WTKS, he would be delivering these fiery monologues about race or, just liberals and conservatives, and just these fiery speeches. Then he'd be like, all right, let's check on traffic with Miguel. And I would just be like, thanks, Bill. So I was like, you know what? This isn't for me. And so that's when I was like, if I'm not going to be able to use my voice, this isn't going to be for me. And so I was looking to do another job, to get out. And so right before I got that full-time job in Savannah, Steve Kramer, who was just most recently at Channel 933 in San Diego, we both went to the same college together and worked at the same college radio station. And we were roommates in Savannah for a couple of months because he was a year older, and he got a job in Panama City hosting a morning show. And so that was the summer of '07 when he moved to Panama City. Well, fast forward to this early beginning of 2008, he was like, hey, this girl, Holly O'Connor, she's got the co-hosting job. She moved down here from Ohio. We're going to this morning show conference called BitFest. It used to be a part of this prep service called Bitboard. Do you want to come with us? Because you can network and try to get out of Savannah, and we can pretend like you're part of our morning show, because you had to be a member and a part of a morning show to go to this conference.
Okay.
And so I drove up from Savannah to Charlotte. They drove up from Panama City, and that's when we first met, like Ace and TJ and Bird and Jeff and Jer and BJ Shea, all of these names that we are just love so much. We met all them for the first time, and we pretended that we were a morning show. Well, I think it was like the second night. It was Holly and Kramer and I. We were all like drinking and joking, and we were like, this could be a morning show. It could be something interesting. But they were like, we're in Panama City in Market 250. Like, they're not going to hire a full-time third person to be on the show. Well, fast forward to the summer of '08, I don't know. It was once again kismet. They were like, you know what? We like Miguel. Let's have him come be on the show.
Huh.
So in the summer of '08, I moved down to Panama City. I went from full time in Savannah to part time. They were like, we can't pay you full time money, but you get to be on the show. We're going to have you do some other programming duties. And so I moved to Panama City with a dream and a hope in 2008, in the summer of 2008, and I've been in Florida ever since.
And now you spent a couple years there, or how long did you spend as a team with Kramer?
So Kramer, Holly, and I, we were in Panama City from 2008 until the summer of 2011. And then because like months before that, because I was working like 2 extra jobs, and I was like, I've tried this radio thing. Maybe it's time for me to pack it up, go home to Atlanta. I had some friends from college that were working in CNN at the time in entry level positions, and they were like, they have some spots open. Why don't you try this? And I was pretty much ready to pack it up and go home to Atlanta. And something told me to just wait. I always have a saying that in our career with Holly and I, it's this weird serendipitous feeling I get where I'll say, I feel like the clouds are gathering, like something is about to happen. Something is about to change. So in the spring of like 2011, when I was ready to like just pack it up and go back home, we got a call from someone that said, hey, we know there's a radio station somewhere in South Florida or Central Florida that might be looking for a morning show. That's all we can tell you. And so we were like, well, this is interesting, because in the 3 years I had been there, we hadn't gotten any bites from anywhere. And so I was like, all right, I can kind of feel something's coming. And then literally it was just like the skies opened up. And that's when Ace and TJ left KISS in Charlotte. And so the other station that was interested in us was 98.7, Play 98.7 in Tampa, both owned by CBS Radio. So all of a sudden we went from like ready to give up to CBS Radio was courting us. I mean, this like never happened. I mean, it was crazy. Like they flew the 3 of us up to New York, and we met all the corporate people from CBS Radio then. I mean, and we were like, our stuff don't stank. What you talking about? We are fancy. And they pretty much were like, you can choose between Charlotte and Tampa.
So they knew about each other. They knew that they were trying to get you on both places?
Yes. It was the most insane thing. I mean, I don't think that will ever happen again in my career. I mean, it was a really interesting, cool moment. So we ended up picking Tampa, Play 98.7. Well, that lasted for a year. Our station, it was just really bad. And so we were together. So from 2008, and then we moved to Tampa in 2011, and then the station folded in the summer of 2012. And then we were jobless for 6 months. And so then that's when our show, as That Guy Kramer show with Holly and myself, we were done at that moment.
Kramer went off on his own. And then how long before you and Holly decided to start your own show, or did you do anything before that happened?
So as we were going through the holidays of 2012, everyone sort of did a deep dive on like, what do you want to do? And I went back to Panama City for the holidays to visit some friends. And the general manager of the station we had worked at, Island 106, said, hey, I heard you're in town. Let's meet for breakfast. And so she was like, listen, I know your dream was always to host your own morning show. We've got a morning show. Would you want to do like a personality-driven afternoon show?
Okay.
And by this point, I had been working with Kramer Holly for so long that I kind of doubted myself. And I was like, well, I feel like I'm more of like the producer sidekick. Like that's kind of the role I've crafted for myself. And she was like, well, think on it through the holidays and get back to me. Well, I called my mom, and she was like, I have listened to you your entire life talk about this damn show that you want to host. If you don't take your black ass to Panama City and host this show, I'm going to come down there and take you myself. And I was like, all right, well, it looks like we're going to Panama City. So I went to Panama City, and we had a producer with the Kramer show that first time we were there, Mandy, who was still there, and she had been with several of the morning shows. Well, she was the producer for the show they had, and so they teamed us up, and it was Miguel and Mandy in the afternoon, and we were doing that for about 3 months. And then there was some stuff that happened with the morning show that was there. They ended up leaving. And so they moved Mandy and I to mornings. And then we brought Holly back. And then that's when the Miguel show with Mandy and Holly was born in the spring of 2013.
Now, did you know that you and Holly were going to be friends for so long after meeting her at this conference?
Well, so funny story about that. So we met at that conference and we pretended to be a morning show. So then at the beginning of that summer, when they were like, all right, we think that Miguel could be on the show, but he's only part-time, I couldn't afford to live anywhere. And Kramer was dating his now ex-wife at the time. And he was like, well, you can't move in with me because I'm moving in with a girlfriend. And Holly was single at the time. And so he was like, Holly, is it okay if Miguel moves in with you? And we only met once at the conference. So literally the second time that I met Holly, I was moving into her apartment to live and work with her.
Wow.
And we were like, how is this going to go? But thankfully, it worked out well. I mean, we found out very quickly that, I mean, we were thick as thieves. And so we lived together the whole time I was in Panama City the first time. Then when we moved to Tampa the first time, we lived together. And then when I moved back to Panama City for the afternoon show, she stayed here in Tampa for a while. And that was the first time we lived apart the whole time. And so then when she moved back to Panama City to do the morning show, she was pregnant and married. And I was like, I think we're good.
So you're now in Panama City. You're hosting your own morning show. What did you find different about that compared to being just the psychic?
It was very hard at first because we were still doing the Kramer show. Because I didn't know what do I stand for, what do we stand for, how do we craft an audience? I mean, we had to relearn everything because you went from having someone that was the driver of the show to the second chair, Holly, me, the third chair, and then Mandy, who, you know, from the first time around, she was like assistant producer. So we all were like, what is our show? And so the first couple of months, we were just sort of doing what we always did with Kramer. And then slowly we started to sort of craft out our own vision, our own mission statement to what is the Miguel show with Mandy and Holly. And then from there, it started to evolve. But at first, it was hard. And especially because I was so used to being sort of like the funny guy who, you know, Holly and Kramer would go back and forth. I'm doing stuff behind the scenes, still listening, answering phone calls, doing social media, and then I'd chime in with a funny line. So I go from that to driving the ship all the time, and then also being in the conversation and making sure everything was done. So it was an adjustment for my brain to sort of wrap itself around, you know, doing all those things at once.
How different is the mission statement you came up with then to now? Like, have you changed much as the show?
It's pretty much the same, that we want to make people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, that we call it the Miguel and Holly fam. And we want you to sit at the table with us and share your experiences. And we just want you to know that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And that pretty much has remained the same since we sort of found that back in 2013.
Okay. Well, you're now in Panama City. How do you get to Tampa?
So we were there for 2 years in Panama City. And by the beginning of the second year, I started to get that itch of like, all right, I feel like we've sort of got like a good rapport. You know, we've been here before. It's a super small town. And to be completely honest, as a gay Black man, like not the best place to be single and young. As a radio professional, it was amazing. I mean, the people of that city they love radio. They love their radio station. And Island 106 has been around in that city for so long, and they love their radio there. You couldn't ask for a better audience. But I was just like, I was single and I was ready for more. I was ready to go somewhere. So in the fall of 2014, I will never forget it. We were doing the show and I looked over and like right before I started a break, I got a message from the then PD of Hot 1015 here in Tampa. And I couldn't see the message. All I just saw that you have a new message from this PD. And I was like, what? So literally, I don't know what the break was. I don't know what we talked about. All I was thinking about was like, what is this message about? So as soon as we were done, I was like, what's happening? And they were like, hey, some things might be changing here. Do you have time to talk?
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, you bet your ass I'm ready to talk.
Have you applied for
And
this job, or had you applied for it, or they were just finding you?
yeah, they found us. So
Wow.
it was the PD of one of the stations that we had interviewed with Kramer 2 years before that.
Oh, okay.
And so they were out here in Tampa, Dan Mason Jr. And he had interviewed us in Boston for AMP, that TJ ended up getting the job for. And we didn't get the job, obviously.
Yeah.
And so he remembered us from the interview and said, hey, I kind of like what y'all are doing in Panama City. Let's have you all send in some tape. So then that process took like 3 months.
Yeah.
So it took a long time. But that's how we ended up here in Tampa.
What do you think it is about your show that stands out amongst other shows? Because you get a lot of attention everywhere. Like, I know that everyone knows about your show. It's because it's a great show. I mean, obviously we've seen it. Your digital is amazing. You're like what I try to strive for. Your guys' digital presence, like your view and the way your shot looks, has always been something I've strived for to get all my companies that I've worked for to look like. I'm like you got to look at this, like Hot 115. Like look at their setup. Look at the way they got the cameras. Like look at how this is amazing looking. And I still haven't got anyone to do it for me. So one day I'm gonna get to your spot. But like, so how do you like Tampa? What is it about your show that you think is so successful?
Thank you so much for that. I feel like everybody in radio has the imposter syndrome where we all feel like, someone's gonna find out that I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so whenever anyone says, people are looking at your show or they're listening or they like it, to me, I always feel like nobody knows about us.
Yeah.
We're in this little corner here in Florida and we're just doing our show for our listeners and that's it. So thank you. That's such a huge compliment. But I think what really stood out to people from the very beginning is that Tampa is a legendary radio market. You have Bubba the Love Sponge, the person who is right next door to us, Mike Calta, Orlando and the Freak Show, MJ and BJ, 93.3 FLZ, our competitor. And then you had Kane we were competing against, Orlando. We have people that have been here for 20 plus years in the market. People love their radio here in the city as well. And the thing that we noticed the most, and especially when we were here the first time around, is that the radio here, it was very adversarial. It was like, let's fight. We're gonna fight. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna argue. We're gonna debate. That is not Holly and I. We are not those people. We are the, hey, we love everybody. We'll have adult conversations, and we, if you listen to our Uncensored podcast, like we go there because I'm a very inappropriate person, and so that sort of weaves itself in throughout, even like the fun stuff. But we noticed from the very beginning that our show was a little bit different when it came to that, and so we had to teach people to trust us because when we first got for instance, our first producer, Nikki Nunez, she was the former morning show, Jay Donovan, who we replaced on Hot 101.5. She was her producer.
Oh, wow.
And I'll never forget it. We were doing like the pre-planning stages for the show before we started. And our PD, Dan Mason, was like, all right, what do you want your mission statement to be? And we had all these like, we want people to feel like they're a part of something. We want people to not feel alone. And I remember, and I hope Nikki doesn't get mad at me for saying this, but like she started crying in the meeting and we were like, why are you crying? And she was like, how do you do all these things? Like, how do you make people feel like they're a part of something and you be so nice? This just doesn't make any sense because no one had done radio like that here before, unless, you're doing like a very AC type show, but we do it in a top 40 bent. And so I feel like our listeners at first, they were like, what sort of trick are y'all trying to pull on us? Like, no one's ever that nice on the radio. And over time, as our listeners have gotten to trust us, as we have sort of shown our hearts and we've lived our lives on the radio, we go out of our way with social media to talk to listeners. We've really built an amazing rapport with our listeners that I simply love. And just, we live in paradise. That we always say, we live where you vacation. And the great thing about, living in Tampa Bay, we got three major cities, Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater. Then you have little beach towns, you have suburban towns. Orlando with the theme parks is like right around the corner. So, I mean, you have everything that you want right here in the city.
You got your morning show. This is what you've always wanted to do. It seems like you're pretty set. Like, you guys seem like a good family. You guys get along as far as I can tell. You guys seem to get along really well. You guys seem like friends. What could you possibly want next? Like, is there something that you guys are eyeing as a team or even individually? Like, have you always wanted a program? What's next for Miguel?
Oof, no programming for me. I do not want that. That's what we're figuring out now, because, I am a workaholic and I never stop. And that's why I take such huge compliments. And I'm so grateful when people compliment us on our social media, because to me, that is literally, as I'm doing our show sheet and planning out our show, with everything that we do, my question to the team is, what's the social media component with it? And so that's always a part of what we do. So we've just been working so hard. And then in these COVID times with social injustice happening, we've just thrown our heads in and we're just going full force. So we're actually now, Holly and I, especially at 30, 34, Holly's 38, we're now like, all right, top 40, this isn't going to be our game forever. What's the next step? I don't know yet. And this is the first time in my life I've ever said, I don't know what's next. I don't know if it's going to be going to a hot AC, or is it going to be political talk, or is it going to be TV? Because I've always been interested in TV, but what exactly does that look like? Being a motivational speaker, writing a book, I don't know. I feel like right now in 2020, the world is open to content creation. I know that I will always create content somehow, because for some reason people find what I have to say interesting, listeners do. And I love talking about it and living it and talking with people and just understanding the human spirit. And so it will exist in some form. I just don't know what that's going to look like in, say, 15 to 20 years.
Do you think the radio will be around in 15 to 20 years?
I do think radio will be around. I think it'll look different. I think that right now we're still trying to figure out how to catch up. People are sick of commercials. How do we fix that? But we got to keep the lights on. People have heard Ariana Grande in The Weeknd and Ed Sheeran 50 million times, but we got to play the hits. How do we continue to be compelling? How do we continue to grab people's attention when they have a million podcasts to listen to? And as soon as you're able to just put your phone into that tuner space where the radio was, and you can't just turn to 101.5, how do we jump through the speakers and we get through all the other distractions? We're not going to look like the business model that we look like right now. We're not going to look like that in 15 to 20 years. How is it going to look? Smarter people get paid a lot more money than me to figure it out. But I do know that it will change.
Do you still have that same passion for radio? Do you ever get calls from kids that are listening to your show like you used to?
I do. And it just, my heart just swells whenever we have a kid that's like, oh my gosh, I want to do radio. And before COVID-19, we had hosted several different high school kids that wanted to do radio. We even had a pair of kids, a black guy and a white girl, like Holly and I, who dressed up as us for Halloween last year, for homecoming. And it was just the biggest compliment. So then we had them in, and we let them do the Hollywood Report and sort of do Miguel and Holly and talk about the stories and whatnot. And so just seeing the excitement in their eyes as their voices and their opinions were going out to the entire city, there was nothing like that. So being able to help people coming up, yes, I love being able to do that.
Well, Miguel, this has been like super fascinating getting to know you. I know we've never actually sat and had a conversation, so this is nice. That so thank you for being on the show and let me talk to you for a bit. How can people reach out to you? I know that you talk about helping others that are coming up in radio. How do people get in contact with you?
Yes, you can always message me on Insta at Miguel Fuller. And I will tell you, I am super, super bad. And this is like my biggest thing that just breaks my heart. I've had a couple people send me air checks. They're like, "Ooh, can you listen to my air check?" And for some reason, I'm super, super, super bad about that. But I always tell people to keep messaging me back, and I get to it. I promise. But you can just hit me up on Insta or Twitter at Miguel Fuller, or you can always email me fuller.miguel@gmail.com.
Are we calling it Insta now? I think I have to switch. Is that what it's called?
That's what the cool kids say. You
All
gotta
right.
listen to those jams that slap.